Good morning, everyone. So my name is Gonzalo Ornelas, Events Coordinator for the Alumni Association. It's truly a pleasure to be here with you all today. Thank you for joining us for session 2 of our 4-part UCLA Alumni Sip Share series. Today we will be featuring alumni Sahra Nguyen, who will be giving us a live coffee brewing demo from home. And then we'll be joined by Patricia Nguyen, Senior Director of Diversity Programs and Initiatives, for a conversation about changing the future of specialty coffee. Don't worry, you'll have a chance to ask Sahra questions, and we will try to get to as many as we can. Before I turn this over to our Vice Chancellor, I'd like to share why we're all here today. For all of those who haven't had the chance to really get to know us yet, this year's UCLA Alumni Sip Share series was created with a mission in mind: to build an empowered network of women that choose to uplift alumni. We created the focus points for this series, and it was important for us to cover optimism, creativity, and innovation. We want to very clearly emphasize that this event isn't about breaking through the glass ceiling, but instead it's about building something using the amazing qualities our alumni already have that allow them to be independent and incredibly successful. With that being said, I'd like to introduce Associate Vice Chancellor Julie Cena.
Thank you so much, Gonzalo, and so beautifully said. On behalf of the Alumni Association, 500,000 Bruins strong around the world, I want to welcome you to this series. We're so excited to be with you, and as we always say, and so look forward to those moments that we can share this fabulous coffee in a room together and continue those conversations. And one of the other reasons we do this is because this simply is what Bruins do, right? We come together to lift each other up, and indeed we've done that over this past year, and frankly have needed that more than ever, as our conversation this morning will also talk about. So as we come together, let's do so in community, lifting each other up, supporting one another, hiring one another, and helping each other always around this journey, as we always will be, Bruin strong. So thank you so much for this morning. And I've got to say, I'm so excited because we're talking about my favorite beverage in the world, coffee. So with that and getting to it, I'll turn it back to you, Gonzalo. Thank you.
Thank you, Julie. As the Alumni Association, we acknowledge that our presence on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Gabrielino Tongva peoples. If you'd like to learn more about why we recite this land grant acknowledgement at the beginning of our event, you can take a look at the link in the chat. I'd also like to remind you to use the chat to share ideas, information, and say I agree, or to simply share ideas, information, or give a thumbs up. We ask the guests to abide by our UCLA alumni principles of community as we share these ideas. You can also find the information of these principles using the link in the chat. And now that we've covered the basics, I'm excited to pass the conversation over to our guest, Senior Director of Diversity Programs and Initiatives, Patricia Nguyen, and our featured speaker, owner of Nguyen Coffee Supply and alumnus Sahra Nguyen. So welcome, Patricia and Sahra.
Yay! Thanks, Gonzalo. Hi, everyone. Gonzalo and Julie, thank you so much for that amazing introduction. It's so good to be here.
Oh, we're so excited to have you this morning, and I appreciate the name of your company. It's a name that I share myself.
Yeah.
So we're really excited to have you perform a coffee demo with us.
Yes.
So yeah, well, we'll let you take it away.
Okay, great. And I see Soleil Delgadillo in the chat. Hi, Soleil. Soleil and I are the same year, and also we were actually the same orientation program together, right, Soleil? Okay, so I'm so excited. Just real quick, I am actually tuning in from Brooklyn, New York. So I'd love to kind of see where all of the alumni who are joining us today, just drop in the chat where you're joining us from, because I think it's so beautiful that our network is so expansive. I know that everyone is kind of all around the world doing amazing things. So let us know where you're joining from in the chat. So I'm gonna hop into our Vietnamese coffee demo, focusing on the Caffeine filter, which is a Vietnamese brew method. So if you have a Caffeine filter, I hope you're joining along. If you're not, it's okay. You can get one after the show. So to start, this is a Vietnamese Caffeine filter. It is a stainless steel traditional Vietnamese brew tool, and one of my favorite things about it is that there's no paper waste, there's no paper filter. right? And this is a brew tool that is super traditional and classic to Vietnamese coffee culture. It's been around for many, many decades. I want to say generations. Yay, okay. All right, so first thing we're gonna do is, today we're gonna be brewing with one of my favorite blends. It's our best seller. It's called Loyalty, and it is a blend of both Araca and Robusta from Vietnam. And also, Patricia, feel free to pause with any questions at any point.
And it's a perfect one that using to brew with. Loyalty, as I think about our alumni community and Bruins.
Oh!
And a lot of us like supporting Bruins. I know I've gotten a subscription service hopefully very soon when I'm settled to support your coffee. I also wanted to shout out to Soleil. Thank you for introducing us to Sahra. So yes.
Yes.
I'm so excited for this.
Good point about the loyalty, Patricia. And I have to be honest. I feel like since I graduated in 2009, I haven't been that connected to UCLA or like the alumni network. And we've had conversations about why, or why that possibly is. And I'm so happy to be here because honestly, I want to connect more with the UCLA community. I want to connect more with the alumni. Everyone, we graduated 2009, which means, is that over 10 years ago? which basically means everyone's just kind of like out in the world doing incredible things, and everyone has amazing stories. And like, I've never actually stopped to reconnect with any alumni. So thank you, Patricia and Gonzalo and Sandy and Julie for creating this space and this opportunity for us to connect again. And I really appreciate what Julie said earlier about supporting each other. Like, we as a network should be supporting each other more, and whether it's like offering a platform, networking, hiring opportunities, mentoring. Like, I really hope that we can do more of this together as an alumni network. Great, yay, Rosalind!
You're like doing my job for me, Sahra. Thanks for connecting.
I see another 2009er, Rosalind. Shout out to the CPO. Okay, great. So the first thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna grind our coffee. So I have a grinder back here. I have two grinders, but if you want like my recommendation, currently not sponsored, for like a classic home grinder is like a Baratza Encore. You can get on Amazon or anywhere on the internet. So I'm gonna pop some in.
And what setting are you putting it on in terms of the grain?
Great question. So if you have like the grinder manual, check where it says like, it says French press, like Chemex, pour over. Look for the pour over setting, because that's kind of like a common one with grinders. And then you want to go a little bit more fine than the pour over, but start there and then go a little bit more fine. So on the Baratza Encore, I'm starting at around like 14 to 15, the number 14, 15. All right, I'm gonna pop this over. It's gonna get a little loud.
Wow, that's like not loud at all. You got a very quiet grinder. Does a great job of minimizing sound. Yeah, shout out in the chat if any of you are brewing coffee right now. I know some of folks are taking the time to do that.
Okay.
What was the name of the grinder brand that you said?
Baratza Encore.
Yeah.
Which I realized, okay, so that was actually a little bit more fine than I expected, but that's okay. I have a backup. With my other coffee. Oh, okay. All right. So I do have some pre-ground coffee that I prepared just in case, because I actually don't want to. Okay, to be honest, this is a brand new grinder that I actually haven't dialed in yet. I was starting with a 14-15, but anyways. I have some pre-ground coffee that I prepared just in case for the situation. But yeah, you want to start with pour over setting and go to more fine. And I'm going to show you what that looks like. Okay.
I also appreciate you having this preloaded pre-ground one too, because that's life is like that, right?
Back up. I mean, minor tech difficulty. That's okay. Okay, so I'm going to show you all what the setting looks like. So it kind of looks like this. It's like, can you see that?
Mm-hmm.
It's like rough sand, right? It's not too fine where it becomes muddy, but it's like also not too coarse like a French press. You want it to be a little bit more fine than pour over. Okay, so today, because it is warming up, we're gonna make a Vietnamese iced coffee. And what I like to really do when it gets kind of warm is I like to actually brew the bean filter over ice. A common way is to brew it and then add ice, which also works, but just know that you're gonna get faster dilution. So we're gonna brew it over ice. So the first thing is I'm gonna grab ice cube.
So again, for folks that are asking, it's like you're looking at the consistency of sand. Yeah. So
Yeah, like rough sand, yeah.
by the way, I love the little fuzz spoon that you're using.
Oh
to-
yeah. I try to break up this myth of like perfection with coffee.
Yeah.
So instead of using a tablespoon, use a spoon. Okay, so I have like a big chunk of ice which we're gonna pop into the glass.
Oh, it's beautiful.
So now our instructions are like with the tablespoon. But so we say if you want to use a tablespoon, use 2 tablespoons. If you want to use a scale, use 14 grams. Or if you want to eyeball it, that's totally fine. Or if you want to use a fuzz spoon, that's totally fine, right? Coffee can be precise if you're into like the science of coffee and like pure consistency, or it can be really just kind of like versatile and personal to what works for you, right? So this is called the filter plate. And we're gonna put it right on top of the glass. Over here, I'm gonna have my hot water going. Whoopsies. One more second. Okay. All right. And then this is called the brew chamber. It also has tiny little holes on the bottom. We're gonna put it right on top of the plate. Thanks, Monica. Yeah, breaking the perfection of coffee. You know, somehow coffee, especially specialty coffee culture, kind of became really elitist in like classes, and it kind of like became this thing of like, if you're not drinking it this way, then you're not like a good coffee drinker. And we don't want to promote that type of elitist coffee culture. It's really not about mastery, but really it's about personalization and like just building a more inclusive coffee culture where everyone's preference and approach is totally valid. Okay, so now with a standard ratio with the bean filter is 1:2, right? So this is a 4-ounce bean filter. We also sell a 12-ounce bean filter and a 24-ounce bean filter, but you want to start with a 1:2 ratio. So with the 4-ounce bean filter, we're going to do 2 tablespoons of coffee. Gonna give you a standard brew.
And Sahra, can you tell folks what a fin is? Because I think some people may not know what that is.
Oh my goodness, I skipped over that. The bean filter is a traditional Vietnamese brew tool used to make coffee. I like to describe the bean filter as like if the V60 pour over and a French press had a baby, right? If you get like the press similar to a French press, we also have the full immersion of coffee and water like a French press. And then you're also getting the pour over, which I'll show you soon, like a pour over V60, and you're also getting the gravity extraction like a pour over. But it's not as diluted as a French press, right? Or actually, it's not as deep of an extraction as a French press, because with the French press, the coffee is fully immersed in the water the entire time, right? It's a very, very long, deep extraction. And it's not as light or fast as a V60 pour over. So it's somewhere right in between. And what you're going to end up with, especially with the ratio of 1:2, is a very strong concentrated coffee. So oftentimes we like to describe it as a Vietnamese espresso, right? Great question, Patricia. Okay, so once you put the coffee in, you want to shake it out so it's nice and even on top, right? And the reason why you want it to be even is because you want the water to equally distribute. Otherwise, if we have slopes on the side, when you pour the water in, all the water is going to fall to one side of the bean filter, and you won't get a full immersion. If you want it to be a little bit stronger, you can definitely add a little bit more coffee. I'm going to add it a little bit more. All right. So just for a bit of a frame of reference, 1 tablespoon is about 7 grams of coffee. I just put in about like 2.5 tablespoons. So that's math. 17 grams of coffee, right?
Yes.
It's about 17 grams of coffee. For a double shot espresso, they use about 17 to 20 grams of coffee for a double shot espresso. So that's kind of where you're going to land with the caffeine content in the strength, right? Okay, so this is called a gravity press. And if people have any questions, you need me to slow down and repeat something, feel free to drop in the chat. This is called a gravity press. It also has little holes on the bottom, and it goes right on top of the coffee. All right. So over here, we have our hot water boiling, and we want to boil it to between 195 to 205 degrees Fahrenheit. And the first,
Sorry, you know, some fins, there's like a screw.
Mhm.
Do you recommend it to be tight or loose on those ones?
That's a great question. I'm going to explain that. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pour in a little bit of water. And we want to cover the gravity press, the bottom of it, by about half an inch. And then we're going to let it bloom. And then I'm going to answer that question about the screw. Okay, so just add a little bit of water. And the reason why you want to add a little bit of water first is to kind of like when fresh coffee is roasted, there are a lot of gases that are built up in the roasting process. And so you want to add a little bit of water to help the coffee bloom, but that really needs to degas and also open up and prepare for extraction. It's kind of like if you make a French press, you also add a little bit of water, right? Okay. Now to your question, Patricia. So yeah, that's a great question. If you explore different bean filters in the market, you will find a version where it's a screw-on press, right? So personally, from my experience, the screw-on press is good if you're using non-fresh coffee, right? If you're using kind of like older coffee that's a little bit more stale, it's not going to bloom. So what you actually need is you need to screw it down to tighten it so that the water can actually, it doesn't just flow through, right? But when there's fresh coffee, there's actually, the coffee blooms, it goes up and down with the water. So you actually need room for it to go up and down. If you try to use a screw and you tighten it with fresh coffee, it's going to expand and become too tight and the water can't flow through.
No,
Okay.
I appreciate that because I have one of your fins and I noticed that was like a difference and the coffee does taste different, particularly paired with your fresh coffee. So thanks for explaining.
Exactly. So yeah, the question is like the differences between or the approaches with the gravity press, whether it's a screw on or like a drop-in gravity press, has a lot to do with the type of coffee you're using, whether it's like older coffee, staler coffee, or fresh roasted. Okay, so we let the coffee bloom for about 45 to 60 seconds. And now I filled the water all the way to the top. I don't know if you can see that. And it's starting to drip. Okay, so I'm gonna share a little trick to dialing in your bean filter if you're using a grinder at home, right? So you wanna start with a pretty fine grind size, right? But let's say, how do you know if it's fine enough or coarse enough? You can try to hit the, what we call like the timing trick, right? So there are two time metrics you kind of want to aim for. The first time metric is the first drip lands or falls by or before the 2-minute mark. And the last drip falls around the 5 to 6 minute mark, right? So if you kind of like dial in your bean filter where the drip or the flow is flowing within that time frame, then you're gonna get a solid brew. Now, if it's dripping way too fast, it's like gushing, water's gushing out within the first 2 minutes and it's all done, that means you're getting a really, really fast and light extraction. So that means the coffee is probably too coarse. You want to make it a little more fine. If you find that the bean filter is taking like 12 minutes to brew, then that means your coffee is probably too fine or packed too tight. So you want to like make it more coarse, right? So that's the time trick. Great. All right. So now we let it brew. Super easy, right?
What do you typically do when you let your coffee brew in those 5 minutes?
Good question. I kind of like go on my phone, I check social media. I get ready probably. But since we're here, we can definitely dive into some questions, Patricia. Any questions so far from you or anyone in the chat about how to brew with the bean filter so far, or about Vietnamese coffee in general?
Yeah,
brewing. I love that.
What's that? Oh yeah, I was gonna ask you, you know, when you make coffee, do you drink only in the morning or are you the type that drinks in the afternoon too?
I do drink, I drink it every morning. And then it is common that I would drink something in the afternoon, right? But I try not to go more than 2 cups a day. Only because I don't want to become intolerant to coffee, and then like I can't really taste it or like experience it. Yeah. What about you, Patricia? How many cups a day do you drink?
I usually do in the morning, and I drink it pretty black. And particularly your coffee, it's pretty strong. So I actually just stick with 1 cup. There is some questions here. If your grinder has one setting, is there a length of time or consistency that someone should go for?
Mm. So if your grinder has one setting, then it's not about the length of time or consistency, because that means you're only getting one grind size, right? So a little hack you can try there is, I don't know what the grind setting is, if it's gonna be too fine, too coarse, or just right, but you can try adding more or less coffee to kind of like control the flow of the water, right? So let's say your one grind setting is like too fine, add a little bit less coffee, right? And then if it's really fine, don't even use the filter press inside, right? If it's really coarse, I'd say add more coffee and maybe like pack it in and like really push down the filter press so it can kind of control the flow. Yeah. But it's gonna be really difficult if it's not essentially the right coffee grind size for the screen filter.
Got it. I've definitely taken your coffee bag to a store to ask them to grind it for me because I don't have a grinder at home. So if that's a tip.
What grind setting?
Like when I asked them for like I'm in between for a pour over because I don't have a grinder at home. So yeah, that was a good way. Each one is asking, is there a brew process method that works best for those who prefer a stronger cup of coffee?
Yes, there is. Okay, so if you prefer a stronger cup of coffee, the first thing is you want to start with the bean, right? And so it starts with the bean, and then it's the roast, and then it's the brew method, right? So caffeine in our coffee, caffeine content in coffee beans, it starts with the bean. Different varieties have different caffeine content within them naturally. So for example, Vietnam is the #2 producer of coffee in the world. And also Vietnam is the #1 producer of Robusta coffee beans in the world, which means Vietnamese coffee culture is really centered around the Robusta bean. And the other variety in the coffee world that's very popular, so there are two main varieties, it's Robusta bean, and then there's Arabica beans, right? So the main differences between Robusta and Arabica beans is Robusta beans have 2/10 more caffeine content than Arabica beans, right? Robusta beans also have more antioxidants and 60% less fats and less sugars than Arabica beans. So what that means from like a flavor profile experience is that Robusta beans will be stronger in caffeine, but also more of like that dark chocolatey, bold, nutty profile because it has less fats and sugars. So the first thing is, if you want a really strong cup of coffee, start with the Robusta bean, right? And then the second thing is, people often associate a dark roast as strong, right? Because it has like that punch to you, right? But really, the darker the roast, the less caffeine there is, right? Because caffeine actually gets burnt off in the roasting process. So if you want a really strong like a strong caffeinated brew, you want to actually go for like a light or medium roast, right? So remember, dark roast may taste like there's a punch, but it means there's less caffeine because caffeine gets burnt off in the roasting process. The third thing is how you want to brew it, right? So let's say if you're brewing it with like, you know, a V60 pour over, that's a really fast brew. So it's going to be a lighter extraction, right? It's very, very quick. If you want a stronger brew, I would go for like a deeper extraction, whether it's a French press where it's like fully immersed and it's in the coffee for a long time. You're getting all all the coffee goods out. The feed filter is also a very, very concentrated, deep extraction because you're also getting full immersion and it's a slow drip, right? So it's slowly dripping. So that means you're getting a lot of deep extraction. And then of course, the other one is an espresso machine. It's also a very, very deep extraction.
Thank you. Actually, that process of knowing the beans in terms of the roast, in terms of is sort of counterintuitive to me. So thank you for sharing that tidbit. And actually maybe extending on that question a bit. So does that mean for decaf, they're roasting it for like even darker to get it to become decaf?
Good question. No, decaf, to make decaf coffee, it has to go through an entirely another process before the roasting process to remove all the caffeine content from the coffee beans. And then they roast it for the flavor profile.
Got it. And then a little bit more about the beans. We got a question. Can you talk a little bit about where your beans come from and the land and the people that grow them?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Julie, for your question. So we import directly from our coffee beans. We import both Arabica and Robusta beans from farmers and producers in Vietnam. We currently work, our main producer is from the Lat, and we also work with other producers in the north that are focusing on like women and ethnic minorities who work in farming. So Well, in the coffee world, we are single origin. Vietnamese, we are direct trade, which means there's no middleman. We import everything directly. We have a direct relationship with our producers and farmers, which means it's a very collaborative relationship about how do we improve, the coffee industry in Vietnam? Like, how do we improve the quality of the coffee, right? Like, what types of biofertilizers are we using? How are we picking the cherries? How are we picking them when they're ripe, right? So it is a very collaborative process. And that's because specialty coffee isn't just something we drink, right? Specialty coffee is actually a collective investment from people all along the supply chain who are making a commitment to improve the lives of producers and to build a more sustainable and equitable coffee trade, right? So as specialty coffee that we know it today, that's very common, with countries like Ethiopia, Brazil, or Colombia, it didn't just sprout from the ground on its own. It was like a whole collective investment of like, hey producer, hey farmer, did you know that if you try doing this to your crop using organic practices and biofertilizers and you handpicked the right ones instead of just like picking all of them at once, you get a better crop at the end, right? You get a better harvest, which means you can sell it for a higher rate because it costs more time to pick just the right cherries. It costs money to use better like organic practices and biofertilizers. And then the buyers then sell that at a higher rate to roasters. Roasters then sell that to baristas. Baristas are now telling us this cup is $5, $6 and not $3, right? It's a lot of education involved, but the main point here is that it is a collective effort from people all on supply chain. And I felt like people weren't offering those values to producers in Vietnam, but rather when I entered the industry, everyone would be like, specialty coffee is great, it's transparent, it's sustainable, et cetera, et cetera. But when I would ask, what about Vietnam? They would immediately box Vietnam out and say, but not Vietnam, because Vietnam is cheap, Vietnam is gross, and Vietnam is instant coffee, right? And while there is a history and a long system of like Vietnamese coffee and Vietnamese coffee production being channeled into the instant coffee market, that's a human-made system, and that's going to continue unless we make efforts to change that and offer Vietnamese coffee farmers the opportunity to evolve from instant to like specialty and premium, right? So that's a little bit about our coffee.
A little bit. That was a really great lesson, and thank you for dropping all that knowledge. So I have to actually share then. Can you maybe share what you studied at UCLA? Because I find this so interesting as it relates to your coffee business.
Yeah, so I am a proud Asian American Studies major, and also actually double majored in world arts and cultures, creative writing. Shout out to WAC, shout out to Asian Am. And I actually, interesting story, fun fact, I actually applied to UCLA as an Asian American Studies major, which is like quite rare for incoming freshmen, because usually people like discover it, they're like, I need an easy major. But I was very passionate, in my high school years as a teenager about activism and about my community. And so it was because of my passion in activism and social justice that I was like, and I'm from Boston. I was like, I want to go study Asian American Studies at the best Asian Am program in the country, which is at UCLA. And so I applied, and I specifically applied for the Asian Am program, and then I got rejected. And I was like, I got rejected, and I was so heartbroken. So I actually got through with the letter of appeal. So I wrote a letter of appeal to the admissions office, and I said, I know you rejected me, but I really want to come to UCLA, and I want to major Asian American Studies because I care about my community and I want to forward my learning and my activism and work with the community. And I believe one of the admissions dean at the time was Vu Tran. I think that's the person who may have signed my letter. I don't know if he's still there. And then that's how I got in after I got rejected.
Oh, thank you for sharing and being
Meg's
vulnerable.
here. Meg's here. Hi, Meg.
For those of you that know Meg, do you want to share who Meg was to you?
Oh my gosh, Meg. Oh my gosh, Meg was, a huge icon, a living legend, a huge mentor, such a mentor and resource to like everyone at Asian American Studies, of course, but I think just like a lot of the student organizing activists in general. I remember visiting Meg in her office. Were we in Campbell Hall? Is that where the center is, Meg? Yeah.
That time, I think, right? Yeah.
So just checking on the coffee real quick. So we just finished brewing. You're done when it stops dripping. And as you can see, ice cube is still there. So the coffee cools as it drips. So this is how I like to enjoy my iced coffee. Okay, actually another tip real quick. So because this is a 1-to-2 ratio, that you're gonna end up with a very concentrated brew. It's like a Vietnamese espresso. Now, if that's too strong for you, what you can do is you can actually do a second pour through the Fiend filter to kind of loosen up your coffee, and you'll end up with about 6 to 8 ounces of water. So it's kind of like an Americano, right? When you add hot water to an espresso, right? Same thing with the Fiend filter. Go ahead and do a second pour if that's your vibe. I'm gonna keep it as is today. And
That would definitely be my vibe because I already speak fast, so that would probably be a good idea.
I think we're the same because I also speak very fast. Also, another thing is, so once you make your coffee, you notice that like I didn't add sweetened condensed milk first, right? And for people who may be familiar with Vietnamese iced coffee, there's this very iconic image of like the thick layer sweetened condensed milk and the coffee and the Fiend, which is delicious, which is how I grew up learning Vietnamese coffee. But one of the things that we're really trying to do with like shifting the narrative around Vietnamese coffee is expanding the idea of Vietnamese coffee, where it's not just synonymous with sweetened condensed milk, and it's not synonymous with cheap, and it's not synonymous with just like overly sweet. Vietnamese coffee is a coffee bean that is super versatile and can be enjoyed in a myriad of ways, right? The full spectrum. And as you would make any other type of coffee, you make your coffee, and then you add the milk and sugar and the cream, the oat milk, you know, whatever you want, right? Then you kind of like make it how you like it. So, and also the thing about Vietnamese coffee, if you're using really, really fresh and like, you know, quality coffee beans, you don't really need that much sugar because you don't want to mask the coffee. You just want to complement it. Whereas in, you know, some places where you may have experienced, if they're using a lot of sweetened condensed milk, it's very possible that maybe the coffee is really bitter, or it's really burnt, or it's really stale, and so it kind of like masks the coffee. And so we're trying to break away from that, where it's like it's not synonymous with sweet condensed milk, but really you can enjoy it however you want. So I'm just gonna add just a little bit, like 1 teaspoon, right? Whoops, because I just wanna add a little bit. I don't want to mask the coffee. So if you can see the bottom of my cup, that's really like all I'm adding, right? Just a little bit. You don't need a whole thick layer unless you want a like sweet cup of coffee. And then I also like to add a little bit of milk to mine.
Ooh.
Yeah, why not, right?
Yeah, it feels like dessert in the morning with the condensed milk.
So it's just like it's like if I were making coffee without condensed milk, I would do like 1 or 2 teaspoons of sugar. So it's kind of like the same thing. All right.
There are, Meg let us know, which for those that may not know, UCLA actually has a very robust Asian American Studies resources. So we actually have a center that's actually led by an alumna, Karen Umamoto, who actually just secured a grant in working with Stop API Hate. And then we actually have a separate studies department that honors the major and stuff like that. So that's actually a really big pride point of ours. Back to your coffee for a minute. If people actually wanted to order this at a Vietnamese restaurant and the menu may not say Vietnamese coffee, what would they look for on the menu?
That's a great question. I think this question applies to like this pattern of, or this behavior, or this behavior of just asking, where does this come from, right? I think it's such a powerful step that we as consumers can do for everything that we consume. Like, where's my fish from? Where's my shrimp from? Where's my avocado from, right? Like, there's a huge slave industry in Thailand that actually feeds most of the world's seafood industry, right? And so, and that's because it's lack of transparency. But when we eat like a plate of fish in a restaurant, we don't know where it's from and who produced it. And there isn't a lack of transparency, but really that lack of care for consumers to hold the restaurant or the buyer, the purveyors accountable, then a lot of exploitation will continue, right? And that's why transparency is so key. Or this question of, hey, which coffee beans are you using? Or like, what coffee are you using? Or like, where is my shrimp coming from, right? I think the more consumers can ask these questions, the more accountability we can build into the whole global supply chain for all types of products, right? But back to your question, Patricia, if you're at a restaurant, you know, it's very common in a lot of like, we're talking about the more mom and pop Vietnamese restaurants, like Cafe du Monde has kind of become the go-to brand for like the Vietnamese immigrant coffee experience. And that in itself is a really rich part of like, I think the Vietnamese immigrant diasporic experience in the US. Definitely clarifying that, you know, Cafe du Monde isn't a Vietnamese coffee brand. It's not to say it's not good or anything, but just recognizing that it's not a Vietnamese coffee brand. And my anthropological assumption here is that It reminded lots of Vietnamese immigrants of coffee in Vietnam because it's very, very dark and like kind of like burnt and robust. And it was very economically accessible for lots of immigrants coming up, right? So that is a common option, nothing wrong with it, but I think just the awareness that we can have as consumers would just help grow the culture a lot.
So you can make it on the menu. If you go to like a Vietnamese mom and pop, you'll see like in the beverage section, it may be called café soda, right? Which means a coffee with the milk and the ice. Or if you just want the coffee alone, it may be just cafe, and it may be spelled like PHE for those that may be wondering. I'm so tasty. I'm so jealous, Sarah.
Oh yeah, it's so good. I wish you could have some cheers. Is that Monica Lee? Is that my former roommate? Is that the same Monica Lee, 09? Monica, are you there?
The other question I had for you that got sent through here is, of course, there's a loyalty to the Fin, right, in terms of Vietnamese coffee, but if folks don't have a Fin, are there certain products that you like to brew your coffee with?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is where like coffee as personal is so important to us in how we talk about coffee culture. It's not about like a right or wrong or how you should be drinking or how you should be brewing it. However you like to enjoy your coffee, whether it's an automaker, like the drip coffee, a French press, a pour over, a Chemex, an AeroPress, an espresso machine, a Fiend filter, right? Our coffees can be enjoyed through all those brew methods, right? So I highly, and what's amazing about coffee and like our coffee as well is that you can have one bean and you can brew it in a variety of different brew methods, and they'll all taste completely different, right? If you try loyalty as espresso, it's completely different from as a Fiend. And it's also completely different as a pour over, right? Because different brew methods bring out different notes and different experiences. So I highly encourage people to just experiment with the different coffee beans and experiment with how you like to make your coffee, and then make a determination of what flavor profile you like the best.
Thank you so much, Sarah. And I know I really appreciate how you're changing the narrative around coffee culture and how we make it. So maybe we'll go and talk a little bit about your own narrative. So would love for folks to learn. Can you tell us a little bit about Nguyen Coffee Supply's mission and why it's important? I think you shared a little bit in terms of where the beans come from, but I think people can sort of maybe hear how strong your ethnic studies background is, your care for social justice is. So would love to hear you talk a little bit about your company and its mission.
Great question. Thank you for opening that up. So I decided to start Nguyen Coffee Supply around, I started thinking about it in 2016 because I noticed that Vietnamese food and culture was having like a big moment in mainstream culture. And on a similar wavelength, I noticed that Vietnamese iced coffee was becoming super trendy, and it was popping up on a lot of cafes and like coffee shops and specialty coffee shops on those menus, and not the mom and pops, but like the more like cafe specialty coffee shop spots. But Patricia, every time I would order their Vietnamese iced coffee, it didn't taste anything like the Vietnamese iced coffee I knew. And I would ask them, oh, what kind of beans are you using in this Vietnamese iced coffee? And they would say, oh, it's like our house espresso from Colombia, or like our house cold brew from Ethiopia. We add sweetened condensed milk to it, right? So that was so problematic to me. And I kept seeing that over and over. And I found it to be very problematic in many ways. One, it's just total false advertising, right? You're telling consumers it's one thing when it doesn't even taste like that. So then consumers think these coffee tastes like something it's not. Two, you're rendering the actual producers of that coffee bean, be them Ethiopian farmers or Colombian farmers, you're rendering them invisible for all their labor, right? And three, people want to profit off of the culture cachet of Vietnamese coffee, but yet the producers of that culture, of that product, Vietnamese people, are not benefiting in that transaction at all. And they're not even a part of that transaction, right? So for all these reasons, I was like, this is wrong, right? And so I started looking into it, and I was like, why don't they just use like real Vietnamese coffee beans? And that's when in my research, I discovered that one, Vietnam is the #2 producer of coffee in the world. And I was shocked, Patricia, and like as a Vietnamese, I had no idea. And I was like, this is incredible. Like Vietnam, they contribute and they touch lives all around the world through coffee. But why don't I know that? And why don't people know that? Imagine the cultural connection that could have happened, or the appreciation for Vietnam that could have happened around the world if people knew that this was a part of their lives. The reason why I don't know that, and many people don't know that, is because of lack of transparency.
Right.
And Vietnamese coffee has been rendered invisible in the entire coffee world. Once Vietnamese coffee leaves Vietnam, it's no longer Vietnamese coffee, it's coffee, right? Even though it doesn't hurt anyone to say Vietnamese coffee, right? But then we see, like, over the last 10, 15 years, we see with the birth of the specialty coffee movement, it's all about transparency, right? So now people are calling out 100% Arabica from Ethiopia, 100% Arabica from Colombia, natural wash, processed wash, right? Like from this region, from that region, it's like 1500 altitude, right? Like there's more transparency, but those values weren't being applied to Vietnam, right? So, and as an Asian American Studies major, as someone who has worked for like 6 years in journalism and documentary filmmaking, my entire life's work has always been about increasing representation and visibility for our community, right? Through many, many different platforms, be it film, writing, media, now it's coffee. So when I discovered and learned about these injustices, I was just really upset and really angry. I was like, this is wrong, this needs to change. And really, literally the only way I could change it was, well, I'm going to start importing coffee beans myself. I'm going to start roasting them myself. And then I'm going to bring Vietnamese coffee, Vietnamese producers, Vietnamese culture to the forefront and bring visibility to the people, the culture, and the country, so that they can have, you know, one, not just recognition and respect, but they can also have more opportunities to advance their own lives, right? Because what happens in the Vietnamese coffee, what happens, especially coffee, Patricia, is that if people in the US keep spewing this narrative like Vietnamese coffee is cheap, Vietnamese coffee is gross, they're not specialty. It bars Vietnamese producers, but more specifically, Robusta coffee producers all around the world from the opportunity to enter specialty, right? So they're stuck in this like vicious cycle of like commercial lower grade coffee. But with us, we're changing that narrative. And now the more people who can appreciate specialty Vietnamese coffee, the more farmers we can work with in Vietnam to convert their actual land from commercial, like low grade quality production to premium specialty production, because we can kind of like guarantee their crop, right? There's less risk for them, right? Does that make sense? So a lot of reasons why, you know, I started Nguyen Coffee Supply, but definitely at the root of it, I think is my work, you know, throughout all my years, you know, and as an activist and as a community like advocate, and also my foundation with Asian American Studies, just, you know, the themes of visibility, representation, and equity, sustainability are all at the heart of Nguyen Coffee Supply.
Now you're literally re-narrativizing the coffee culture to address systematic issues around racism and xenophobia per brew.
Totally.
Lifting Asian American and voices and you know, our culture. So I really appreciate it. And honestly, that's what I think about in those 5 minutes when I'm brewing your stuff sometimes. Like how, like, it's just amazing that you're able to put this into a product, you know, and
you know, I just want to thank you so much for synthesizing my thoughts and my feelings in those like really powerful, concise words, Patricia. Because you're right. Because like part of changing the narrative for us is we have to create a new system and a new way of being, right? Which is literally building our own global supply chain to create this product, right? 'Cause otherwise, we could change the narrative by saying this is wrong, this is not right, this is wrong, this is not right. But that's like only one part of our process, right? But yeah, and sometimes like just creating change and changing the narrative, it means creating a new way of being or a new possibility of how we can literally interact, exist, operate, work, consume, celebrate, recognize together, right? So it is, thank you for recognizing that, because yeah, it's totally creating a whole new system and a whole new supply chain.
Yeah, I actually wanted to maybe pinpoint a part of your narrative, because I'm also watching you evolve through this process. And you shared a little bit here, you know, you went from ethnic studies and then you became a storyteller via documentary and film. Can I ask, what was I know you spoke about this, but why not do a documentary on this? Why dive actually into it? So are you trying to live the narrative instead of just capturing the narrative?
Yeah, that's such a great question.
I've seen your work on the film side. It's absolutely beautiful. You've done a lot with actually other fellow Bruins. I've been truly inspired by a lot of your film and artwork too.
Thank you, Patricia. That's such a great question. You know, There's like, to be totally honest, there is this piece of my experience as a documentary filmmaker that just became so unstable, you know, and unsustainable, really, right? And I think that's a common theme for a lot of creatives. Our systems just aren't created or designed to really support and sustain filmmakers or creative people. And so literally what that means is I just did not know how I could make a sustainable, healthy living continuing on making documentary films, right? I didn't have the right networks, I didn't have, a trust fund that could just supply my films. Like, it just became really hard for me as an individual. Like, it was financially unstable, which meant it was mentally and emotionally unstable, right? And as I'm like in my mid 30s now, as I was in my early 30s at that time, I was like, it's what kind of change I want to impact, but also like what kind of life do I want to create for myself? So that's just like a really honest point about how unstable, unsustainable creative careers can be, which I think is sad because a lot of people like myself can get burnt out, right? So for me, going back to your question, I could make a documentary film about it, but I think it was more of like, I wanted to make a different type of impact, right? Yeah. I think I've told stories for so long, and I'm not saying that I'm done telling stories. I'm clearly telling stories through this. Yeah. I just like, for me, for the problems that I was seeing, I felt like the idea of making a documentary never even came to me. I just felt like the way to solve this is to literally create a new way of being. So that's what led me here.
Yeah, no, I always appreciate your transparency and your truth to this, right? Because I think, there are a lot of ways that we think about how we want to exist in this world. And, watching you all these years, it's been just an amazing evolution to watch. And, you've truly inspired me also to think about, what is that next step that we need to take? Because also taking care of ourselves is important, right? That's why we spend this time in the morning to brew some coffee and sit down and be with ourselves too.
Yeah, totally. Mm-hmm.
I also wanted to ask you a little bit of how your identity plays into this, right? You're choosing Vietnam, you're choosing a style of way coffee is made, Vietnamese coffee and the cafe soda. How does your identity play into this for you? And I'm going to ask you from like two levels, being Asian American, being Vietnamese, but in spirit of our series as a woman, like how does that inform how you approach your business?
Mm-hmm. Oh my gosh, excellent question. Definitely, it's really clear that like identity, my heritage, my family name is like really in the DNA of the brand. And I think a lot of that is to fuel our mission of being seen, visibility, representation, right? Like growing up, I graduated class of 09 and I graduated high school in 05. So what that means in terms of like the technology world is, when I graduated high school, we were the second class to have access to Facebook, right? So I didn't grow up with social media and YouTube and Instagram and Facebook where there were like other outlets for representation. I grew up in the 90s, and like that time race was so binary, it was so dichotomous. Like there was really no representation through my channels then, which was television and magazines, right? So growing up, I felt really invisible, like so much of like all my life. And I think now, after discovering activism, Asian American studies, it's just like this passion to be seen and to be present, and to also to shape representation through something as simple as naming the company Nguyen Coffee Supply, right? And even when I was like determining or contemplating, what should I name the company? Patricia, I literally I was down to two names. It was like Nguyen Coffee Supply, or it was Tiger Coffee, a Vietnamese coffee brand, right? And I'm the year of the tiger, and I was like, Tiger Coffee, tigers are strong, they're bold, they're fierce, like Vietnamese coffee. And I was like, I think it's also more palatable. I think like mainstream America can like, digest it easier. And I was like, is America ready for Nguyen? Like, is that gonna like backfire on me? Are they not gonna know how to say it? Are they gonna reject it? I really, these are the thoughts I went through when I was naming the brand. And obviously I went with Nguyen Coffee Supply because I was like, you know what? It doesn't matter whether or not people are ready, right? Like, I'm gonna be proud and like really be clear and bold about my name, and I'm gonna put it in the mainstream, front and center, and like I'll help people become ready, even if they're not, right? So that was how I named the company. And yeah, identity. And when we talk about coffee, right, we're very adamant about talking about the people and the culture, right? Because what I have noticed so much is that with coffee culture, a lot of it is about the bean and the variety and the processing and the roasting and the extraction. But there's not enough about what about the people in the culture who grew that bean? Like, what is Ethiopian coffee culture like? What is Colombian coffee culture like, right? Like, and so for us, it's just kind of building a more, I guess, people-centered mission where we're not just extracting the bean from the country and then brewing it and be like, oh, I love this coffee. It's the bean, but let's also expand the narrative of how we think about and shape coffee culture to also talk about the people and the culture who surround that bean, right? And for me, that is Vietnamese culture and Vietnamese identity and Vietnamese experiences. And all of this, you know, cohesively, I feel just helps us to, helps us it increases representation, but I think it also just helps people understand the Vietnamese-American experience a little bit deeper. And what that hope is that we can build more like cross-cultural, cross-racial understanding through something as accessible as coffee.
And I also want to dovetail, like you also helping our own community, yeah, someone that shares in that last name. I think watching you come out with this coffee company made me also lean into my own name and say it correctly and say it unapologetically. So I just want to thank you for all the lessons that you're offering us. And actually on that note, we know we're about to have a bunch of new alumni. Our graduates are going to come out in June. So would love to have you maybe reflect a little bit on your lessons learned from UCLA and perhaps some advice that you have to our Bruins that are about to graduate.
Oh my gosh, so many. Oh, so exciting, so exciting. Okay, so the first thing, I don't know, what is happening with COVID protocol? Are people still convening for graduation?
They're not right now, that due to health things. So we're probably gonna have some virtual, but yeah, but you know, in light of that, you know, we're still gonna have a new cohort of alumni that are gonna join our community very soon.
Okay, so the very first thing I'd say, just really briefly is, if you're graduating, attend every graduation ceremony accessible to you, right? When I graduated, I don't know what I was going through, but I was like, I'm not gonna go to the really big one, right? Like the all campus, all departmental one. I skipped that one. I was like, I'm so over it. I want to get out of here already, right? And I looking back, I really regretted that. I felt like you only have one moment in your life to experience all the celebrations, enjoy where you're at. And I kind of shortchanged myself. So if you're graduating, you know, however you're feeling, I'd say just be super present and attend all the ceremonies and all the celebrations that you can, because you really deserved it and it's never gonna happen again, right? First thing. In terms of advice for moving forward, my favorite advice to share for people, just whatever you want to do, is it is so important to know your why first and foremost, right? Like you got to know your why, right? And that why is like, why are you doing this, right? Like, what is your mission? What do you believe in? What are your values, right? Like things that are like at the heart and at the soul. Because as you go through life, whether you're going to be an entrepreneur or you're not an entrepreneur, life in general is we're faced with so many unknown situations, right? And when you're being faced with unknown situations, knowing your why will always help be your North Star. And then it'll help you navigate the unknown situations because you have your why as your North Star. And then of course you got to break it down with the tactical and like the tangible and like the execution. That's stuff you can get from like mentors and like, you know, your family members, your network, right? Like figuring the tactical is one thing in unknown situations, but before you even get to the tactical, you really have to understand what your why is, and that's going to lead you to the right direction, and then you can figure out the tactical. So I always lead with that, like knowing your why as you're graduating. And the last thing I'll say is, you don't need to know your whole roadmap. Some people do, and if you do, that's great. That's how you're built. But if you don't be discouraged if you don't know everything. You just need to be really present and know who you are today. Figure out what is that next step to get you to the next step, right? And once you get to the next step, you'll figure out who you are in that moment and what you need in that moment to serve yourself in that moment to get to the next step, right? And I think that's all we can really like expect from ourselves. Like, you can't unless you do, but don't feel pressured to be like, what is step 20 from today? Where will I be? What will I do? Like, if that's too difficult to kind of break down, just focus on like, what do I need to do to get myself to that next step? And then just keep it like moving one foot in front of the other.
Such wisdom, Sahra. Thank you so much. And just a note to folks, I misspoke. We're actually going to learn more about what's going to happen for commencement this week. So just stay tuned on that. But Sahra, thank you for so much on the lessons on that. I know we're nearing closing time. So if folks have questions, please send them our way. Because I know Sahra is such a brilliant person and is sharing her experiences openly, which I always appreciate. Maybe in the spirit of this series, can you tell us a little bit how your identity as a woman in terms of owning a business or leading a team really comes into play for you in a positive and maybe sometimes challenging way?
Great question. My identity as a woman. I think I would say one of the things that I often think about, you know, with my identity as a woman being in this role is what kind of leader do I want to be? Right. And, you know, I've grown up with very traditional ideas of leadership because society always spews that to us, right? They tell us like, because I'm not just a woman, but I'm also a Vietnamese-American, and leadership in Eastern culture, Asian culture is very different from leadership in Western culture, right? So I grew up with like these traditional ideas of leadership where a leader is aggressive, a leader is dominant, a leader is charismatic, a leader is controlling, a leader is domineering, right? Like these are the types of messages we receive. And so for me, I kind of like had to navigate a lot of that, right? There are moments in my journey where I felt like I need to be really, really like strict and domineering to be respected, you know, or like I need to be more of a bitch to be respected as a leader, right? And sometimes that's true because sometimes people just don't respect women, right, in certain spaces. And sometimes you need to maybe speak their language. But what I have really been learning in my journey over the last year is how to just be more genuinely me as a leader and like exemplifying a new model of leadership, which is, in my model of leadership, which is really rooted in my identity as a woman and as a Vietnamese-American woman, is very, very empathetic, very compassionate, very patient, high EQ, you know, very understanding, very open. Some people will call it soft, but I no longer feel a need to like model these traditional modes of leadership, which is basically a bitch if you're a woman or like a boss if you're a man. But so yeah, that's how my identity as a woman is really shaping my journey. And I'm just learning to really embrace being all the things that a woman is. Sometimes I'm firm and oftentimes I'm really like gentle, compassionate, empathetic. And I think those are qualities of leadership that aren't talked about often, but I think are very, very important. And there's the type of leader I want to be.
And maybe on that, because you sort of talked about mentorship earlier, can you maybe share, and I know you shouted out Meg here, but maybe some of the mentors or femme mentors that have been in your life?
Oh my God.
Played?
Yeah, I have so many mentors. I have so many mentors in my life since I was like a teenager. I have lots of mentors for different parts of my life. So definitely when I was growing up, I joined, this youth activist program called the Coalition for Asian Pacific American Youth that was housed on the campus of UMass Boston inside the Asian American Studies program. That's where I spent a lot of my high school days. My mentors there were like the program coordinators, just Sophia Kim, which was my program coordinator at the time. Giles Lee was also another program coordinator. You know Giles?
Yeah.
G Quach was also another mentor of mine through the program. Peter Kane, who was director of the Asian Am program, a little bit more of a distant mentor, but he's always around. So those are like my Asian Am community, like activist, political consciousness mentors. And then I also have like creative mentors who I met throughout high school, such as like Jason Talbot, Rob Gibbs, who are like my artist creative mentors. And then I just have like, throughout my years, like I feel like Teresa Wong, I consider a mentor. She's someone who I've known since I was in high school. She was involved in like Boston Progress Arts Collective here in Boston. Lots of mentors. I'm probably forgetting a bunch, but definitely value the role of mentors in my life. And I definitely believe mentorship is so important. And I really wouldn't be where I am without all my mentors throughout all the years.
And you also really lift how important it is in our youth too, right? So for those that are alumni there, we do have a strong alumni mentoring program on UCLA One if you all want to come through that. So a little bit about your business, folks are interested. Where can you purchase your coffee?
Oh my gosh, yes, on our website, BruinCoffeeSupply.com. So we are, we're primarily an e-commerce business. We are importing and roasting, so we ship all across the country. BruinCoffeeSupply.com. And also I'd highly recommend, we do a lot of storytelling and original content. So if you want to stay, updated on our journey, definitely follow us on our Instagram and then sign up for our newsletter. We send out, a monthly editorial newsletter that comes with a letter from me every month, just providing you updates on where we're at in our journey. Yay, thanks, Julie.
Then we got a question from Joseph, what are your next steps for a coffee and wing supply, and what are your immediate goals you're looking to achieve?
Great question, Joseph. Our goal is to continue changing the future of coffee, right? And that means building an inclusive coffee industry where Vietnamese coffee and Vietnamese coffee producers and farmers have more opportunities in specialty coffee, which really means more opportunities for economic advancement, but which also leads to agricultural, environmental sustainability. Because when you improve your coffee production, you improve the land, which makes it more sustainable for future years of farming, right? But in order to change the landscape of Vietnam, we have to change the narrative perceptions of Vietnamese coffee here. So that comes with a lot of our education, our storytelling, our awareness building to get more people on board with in changing their perception of like Vietnamese coffee is good. And the more that grows, the more opportunities we have to work with farmers in Vietnam. So that's our next step, is just to continue growing the Vietnamese coffee movement really in the US and eventually globally. And yeah, just like really changing the coffee game, everything from the culture, how we talk about the people, to how we consume it, to the literal supply chain.
Cool. And maybe to close out a little bit, I'm gonna do some flash round questions with you, just for fun.
Thank you, Tammy.
With that?
I said thank you, Tammy, for dropping that in there.
Oh, thanks, Tammy. What's your favorite spot at UCLA?
My favorite spot on campus? Oh, such a beautiful campus. I miss campus so much. I will say I spent a lot of my time inside the community programs office. So that to me just feels like home. I've been involved with the CPO since I was a freshman, and I also worked there after college. But otherwise, spot, so many amazing spots. I would have to say like the steps in front of WAC, or the steps, or the opposite steps at the CPO, because the sun would just always shine, just like there, and you can see like the whole plaza. You see people like, north and south. So I spent a lot of time on those steps. Mm-hmm.
Did you have a favorite class?
Oh, favorite class. Oh my gosh. It's been so long now.
I know it's been so long, so sorry. You did.
It's definitely my Asian classes. I mean, I feel like this is so obvious, but like everyone loves Don Omatsu, right? Professor Omatsu. I loved all his classes. The classes were so much fun. They were so collaborative. It was always a part. We had snacks in that class, He encouraged us to bring in snacks. Probably one of my favorite classes, yeah.
Were you part of any clubs?
Yes, I was involved. I was involved with CAPSA for all 4 years. I kind of helped like revive it. I kept it going. The Critical API Students for Action. I was also the Culture Night Director at VSU, Vietnamese Student Union. I was also an intern, and then eventually a leadership coordinator with the Asian Pacific Coalition. We worked on the Count Me In campaign. I was involved with the CPO, and I worked. I was an intern with CRAC. I also volunteered with. What is VSU's outreach program? I'm blanking on it.
Seated or Hope?
Hope. Yes, thank you, Rose. I volunteered with Hope for many years. I love Hope. We go out to Westminster. And then I worked as a writing counselor at the Writing Success Program inside the CPO for about 2 years as a student. I was also a front desk intern at the CPO my freshman year.
You were super involved.
I was super involved. Yeah, I was definitely. I loved my time at UCLA.
And what are 3 words you would describe a Bruin with?
Oh my gosh, it's so hard. 3 words to describe a Bruin. I would say 3 words: brilliant, dynamic, and generous.
Those are 3 words I would use to describe you too, Sahra. And I just want to thank you so much for sharing not only your coffee with us today, but also the story behind it and the brand. Bruins, we know we want to support Bruin, so I encourage you all to head over to wingcoffeesupply.com to check it out. Otherwise, the other thing I would also note is you can also come and purchase a She's a Bruin box that will be featuring Sahra's coffee in it, alongside the other women and alumni that are being featured in our Sip and Share series. But Sahra, just thank you so much. You make us so Bruin proud, and I'm always thinking of you as I brew that coffee and the stories that you are lifting and encouraging us all to uplift as well. Really, really appreciate you. Come on, you, yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for doing this and for creating this platform. And I'm so proud to be a Bruin, and it's so great to connect with Meg and Soleil and Rose. Yeah, this was really wonderful, and I hope we can continue building and supporting each other as Bruins.
Thank you. And Gonzalo, I guess we'll let you close it out.
Hi, everyone, and thank you so much, Sahra and Patricia, for that conversation. I feel it's important to, point out that these are the conversations that we should all never take for granted. There's so much transparency and genuinely useful information, along with great values, and just we should really take the time, to dive into why we do these things, and as Sahra mentioned, why or where everything that we consume comes from, take that into consideration. So with that being said, we pretty much answered everything we had in the Q&A. We knocked all those questions out of the park, Sahra. Thank you very much for that, and Patricia. Thank you, everybody.